Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. My channel is Discerning What is True. I am live on Facebook and also on YouTube and Odyssey with the help of a gentleman who helped me get on to Odyssey. I meant to tell this guy 2 or 3 weeks ago, maybe it's been almost a month. He's the one that set up my channel, so I appreciate that, whoever you are. Um, we're going to read the last chapter here of the book by Edward Bernays, and this is chapter 11. It's called The Mechanics of Propaganda. These last 3 or 4 chapters are basically very short chapters, so I felt to simply just go ahead and get these done because it would be good to get these out to other people so they can read it and listen to it. So let's get into the chapter 11 here of Edward Bernays' book called Propaganda, The Mechanics of Propaganda, that is. The media by which special pleaders transmit their messages to the public through propaganda includes all the means by which people today transmit their ideas to one another. There's no means of human communication which may not also be a means of deliberate propaganda, because propaganda is simply the establishing of reciprocal understanding between an individual and a group. The important point to the propagandists is that the relative value of the various instruments of propaganda and their relation to the masses are constantly changing. If he is to get full reach for his message, he must take advantage of these shifts of values the instant they occur. 50 years ago, the public meeting was a propaganda instrument par excellence. Today, it is difficult to get more than a handful of people to attend a public meeting unless extraordinary attractions are part of the program. The automobile takes them away from home. The radio keeps them at home, in the home. The successive daily editions of the newspaper brings information to them in office or subway, and also they are sick of the ballyhoo of the rally. Instead, there are numerous other medias of communication, some new, others old, but so transformed that they have become virtually new. The newspaper, of course, remains always a primary medium for the transmission of opinions and ideas. And if you want to know more about that, you should look into the book I shared about Neil Postman. I did last week. In other words, for propaganda, it was not many years ago that newspaper editors resented what they called the use of the news columns for propaganda purposes. Some editors would even kill a good story if they imagined its publication might benefit anyone. This point of view is not largely abandoned. Today, the leading editorial offices take their view that the real criterion governing the publication of non-public publications of matter which comes to the desk is its news value. The newspaper cannot assume, nor is its function to assume, the responsibility of guaranteeing that what is published will not work out to somebody's interest. There's hardly a single item in any daily paper, the publication of which does not or might not profit or injure somebody. That is the nature of news. What the newspaper does strive for is that the news which it publishes shall be accurate, and since it must select from the mass of news material available, that it shall be of interest and importance to large groups of its readers. In its editorial column, the newspaper is a personality, commenting upon things and events from its individual point of view. But in its news columns, the typical modern American newspaper attempts to reproduce, with due regard to news interests, the outstanding events and opinions of the day. It does not ask whether a given item in propaganda or not. What is important is that it is be news. And in the selection of news, the editor is usually entirely independent. In the New York Times, to take an outstanding example, news is printed because of its news value and for no other reason. The Times editor determines with complete independence what is and what is not news. They brook no censorship. They are not influenced by any external pressures nor swayed by any values of expediency or opportunism. The conscientious editor on every newspaper realizes that his obligation to the public is news. The fact of its accomplishments makes it news. If the Public Relations Council can breathe the breath of life into an idea and make it take its place among other ideas and events, it will receive the public attention it merits. There can be no question of its containing of its contaminating news as its source. It creates some of the day's events, which must compete in the editorial office with some other events. Often the events which he creates may be especially acceptable to newspaper public, and it may be created in that public in mind. If important things of life today consist of transatlantic radio phone talks arranged by commercial telephone companies, if they consist of inventions that will be commercially advantageous to the men who market them, if they consist of Henry Fords with epoch-making cars, then all this is news. The so-called flow of propaganda in newspaper offices of the country may simply, at the editor's discretion, find its way to the wastebasket also. The source of the news offered to the editor should always be clearly stated and the facts accurately presented. The situation of the magazines at the present moment from the propagandist's point of view is different from that of the daily newspaper. The average magazine assumes no obligation, as the newspaper does, to reflect the current news. It selects its material deliberately in accordance with continuous policy. It is not like the newspaper, an organ of public opinion, but tends rather to become a propagandist organ, propagandizing for a particular idea, whether it be good housekeeping or smart apparel or beauty and home decoration or debunking public opinion or general enlightenment or liberalism or amusement. One magazine may aim to sell health, another one English gardens, another favorable fashionable menswear, another what we call Nietzschean's philosophy. In all departments in which the various magazines specialize, the Public Relations Counsel may play an important part, or he may, because of his client interests, assist them to create the events which further their propaganda. A bank, in order to emphasize the importance of its women's department, may arrange to supply a leading woman's magazine with a series of articles and advice on investments written by the woman expert in charge of this department. The Woman's Magazine, in turn, will utilize this new feature as a means of building additional prestige and circulation. The lecture, once a powerful means of influencing public opinion, has changed its value. The lecture itself may only be a symbol, a ceremony. Its importance for propaganda purposes lies in the fact that it was delivered. Professor so-and-so expounding an epoch-making invention may speak to 500 people or only 50. This lecture, if it's important, will be broadcast. Report of it will appear in the newspaper. Discussion will be stimulated. The real value of the lecture from the propagandist's point of view is in its repercussion to the general public. The radio at present, one of the most important tools of the propagandist, is future development is uncertain. So we're seeing that he's talking about something that's the beginning of the radio. And in reality, simply is uncertain because it's just basically being tested out. In fact, I'll say something a little bit real quick about this. This is a book that I've been reading, and this actually is dealing with what we call radio, but it's also dealing with electricity, which is an interesting book. And I want others to maybe start looking at this particular book because I think it's very key. Okay. I wanted to point that out earlier, but I just sort of forgot. But the point is simply is that he's talking about radio here, which is, and in some ways, is on uncertain grounds yet. Okay. It may compete with the newspapers as an advertising medium. Its ability to reach millions of persons simultaneously naturally appeals to the advertiser. And since the average advertiser has a limited appropriation for advertising, money spent on the radio will tend to be withdrawn from the newspaper. To what extent is the publisher alive to this new phenomenon? It's bound to come close to American journalism and publishing. Newspapers have recognized the advertising potentiality of the companies that manufacture the companies that manufactures radio apparatuses. And of radio stores, large and small. The newspaper has, according to the radio in their news and feature columns on important relative to the increasing attention given by the public to radio. At the same time, certain newspapers have brought radio stations and linked them up with the news and entertainment distribution facilities, supplying these two features over the air to the public. It is possible that the newspaper chains will sell schedules of advertising space on the air on the paper. Newspaper chains will possibly contract with advertisers for circulation on paper and over the air. There are at present publishers who sell space in the air and in their columns, but they regard the two as separate ventures. Large groups, political, racial, sectarian, economic, or professional, are tending to control stations to propagandize their point of view? Or is it conceivable that America may adopt the English licensing system under which the listener, instead of the advertiser, pays? That's right. Just thought about that. Yes, because most stations that are, I think, and I might be correct, so we'll have to see, things may have changed, but a lot of the stations in Europe are actually owned by the government. Especially the shortwave channels have been that way for a long time, which they are here in the United States too. But there also are other stations. Some may be locally owned by cities or towns and stuff like that thing. Unlike here in America, they're owned by people or groups of people. That all changed back in the 1990s when it used to be mom and pop, what I would call radio stations or corporate sponsorships. Now that mom and pop radio stations are almost gone. It's just a sad story of what's going on. It's not right neither, because I disagree with what they're doing. But anyway, let's get to the point here. Whether the present system is changed, the advertising propagandist must necessarily adapt himself to it. Whether in the future airspace will be sold openly as such, or whether the message will reach the public in the form of straight entertainment and news, or as a special program for particular groups, the propagandist must be prepared to meet the conditions and utilize them. The American motion picture is the greatest unconscious carrier of propaganda in the world today. It's a great distributor for ideas and opinions. The motion picture can standardize the ideas and habits of a nation, because pictures are made to meet market demands. They reflect, emphasize, and even exaggerate broad popular tendencies rather than stimulate new ideas and opinions. The motion picture avails itself only of ideas and facts which are in vogue, as the newspaper seeks to purvey news. It seeks to purvey entertainment. Another instrument of propaganda is the personality. Has the device of the exploited personality been pushed too far? President Coolidge photographed on his vacation in full Indian regatta in company with full-blooded chiefs was the climax of a greatly over-reported vacation. Obviously, a public personality can be made assured by misuse of the very mechanism which helped create it. Yet the vivid dramatization of personality will always remain one of the functions of the Public Relations Council. The public instinctively demands a personality to typify a conspicuous corporation or enterprise. There's a story that a great financier discharged a partner because he had divorced his wife. But what? Asked the partner. Have my private affairs to do with the banking business? If you are not capable of managing your own wife, was the reply, people will certainly believe that you are not capable of managing their money. The propagandist must treat personalities as he would treat any other objective fact within his province. As a personality may create circumstances, as Lindbergh created goodwill between the United States and Mexico, events may create a personality, as the Cuban War created the political figure of Roosevelt. It is often difficult to say which creates the other. Once a public figure has decided what ends he wishes to achieve, he must regard himself objectively and present an outward picture of himself which is consistent with his real character and his aims. There are a multitude of other avenues of approach to the public mind, some old, some new, as television. No attempt will be made to discuss each one separately. The school may disseminate information concerning scientific fact. The fact that in commercial concerns may eventually profit from a widespread understanding of its activities because of this does not condemn the dissemination of such information, provided that the subject merits study on the part of the students. If a baking corporation contributes pictures and charts to a school to show how breads are made, these propaganda activities, if they are accurate and candid, are in very reprehensible, provided the school authorities accept or reject such offers carefully on their educational merits. It may be that a new product will be announced to the public by means of a motion picture or a parade a picture of a parade taking place 1,000 miles away, or the manufacturer of a new jiggly airplane may personally appeal and speak in a million homes through radio and television. The man who would most effectively transmit his message to the public must be alert to make use of all the means of propaganda. Undoubtedly, the public is becoming aware of the methods which are being used to mold its opinions and habits. If the public is being informed about the process of his life, it will be so much the more receptive to reasonable appeals to its own interests. No matter how sophisticated, how cynical the public may become about philosophy methods, it must respond to the basic appeals because it will always need food, crave amusement, long for beauty, response to leadership. If the public becomes more intelligent in its commercial demands, commercial firms will meet the new standard. If it becomes weary of the old methods used to persuade it to accept a given idea of commodity, these leaders will present their appeals more intelligently. Propaganda will never die out. Intelligent men must realize that propaganda is the modern instrument by which they can fight for productive ends and help to bring order out of chaos. That is the book by Edward Bernays. And I see why it says something here interesting. It was renewed in 1955 by Edward Bernays, printed with the permission of the estate of Edward Bernays. So in other words, I was wondering why he was including television here. So that must have been added on here when they renewed it. So I wanted just to tell you, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to this particular book I've gone through for the last couple of weeks, if not 3 weeks, with Edward Bernays' book on propaganda. I believe it should be a book that should be read by all parties, but especially those in social science, that it would be in the area of psychology. Sociology would be probably important, and also political science. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for listening. Again, I appreciate your ideas and what you like to share. Again, I have books here on my kitchen table as I broadcast tonight, as I always do. I have many books I like to share sometime. This is another book here by Neil Postman, who I feel is a very good author with technography. We might read this book sometime. And also, one of my favorite authors is Eustace Mullins, with this particular book called The Rape of Justice. I've always enjoyed Eustace Mullins. He gets to the point. And we have other books here that I'd like to continue on with. Would be like Anthony C. Sutton with the Bolsheviks. This is Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution. So these are just some of the books I've got on here that I've not yet read on public, and would like to hear what people might have some interest in. And that, because I've got books here, I've got plenty of books, and I like to get them out there. I like to, but I'd like to also hear feedback from others, because I may have a book here that they might be interested in hearing. Again, I have a couple of books, like I said, from Anthony C. Sutton. I have quite a few books by Eustace Mullins. Naturally, these books are interesting to me because my major in college was political science and history. And then I also have done videos in the past when I once went to seminary many years ago. And I also ventured in that particular arena also. And so I like to share different books. I like to share, I like to help people educate themselves to understand simply that there's not either or. There may be a third perspective here. There may be a way to simply, you've been told something in your schooling or colleges or your universities of certain thing, and you may no longer agree with that. I have some works by a gentleman named, small booklet here, what we call Walter Russell. This is a little booklet, but I do have a couple books of his. And we can go anywhere. I have I have a lot of interest in a lot of different things. We've been reading this particular book here, The Creation of New Civilization by Alvin Toffler. There's also about the third wave, which is actually, if you read what he's talking about, is where we're at today. This was a late 1990 book here, but his book was back in the 70s when he started this thing, and basically a lot has to do with computers. And I have another particular book here, also here, with modern art and the death of a culture, which could tie in with the Frankfurt School, and also Antonio Gramsci. I have another book here which most people are not aware of. It's about 40 pages worth of book. It's called The Jewish-Run Concentration Camps in the Soviet Union. Most people are not aware of this. Most people, the sad part, most people see as Hitler as a bad guy, but when you begin to look at this situation, and I keep trying to educate people, and we may do this book also. I have here also the Death by Governments by R.J. Rummel, who's I think has passed away. He's a professor at Hawaii who began to figure out in the 19th century that many governments were killing its own people. That's a fact. And that was last century, and that still continues to today. We just don't hear about it as much. But many of these things, these stories came from communist countries, but it also came from dictatorships also. But anyway, if you have, have some interest in something, and the whole idea is what I would call is create an idea here with this. What I'm sharing with you is to help you expand your mind and have an idea, looking at a different perspective. And things have changed dramatically here in the last 3 or 4 years in my country here in America. That economically, our country's changed tremendously. We are no longer, many of us a lot of people have lost their jobs, and many have been thrown out of work, So we'll see. This is another particular book. Again, it's going to be in the area of what they call American Counter-Revolution, the Constitution Revisited. This is a particularly good book. But like I said, that's where my interest is, But we can, but I don't want to be a strong advertisement here, but I just, if you have interest in a particular, maybe a subject brand, you may not know the name of the book. I have warned, I've actually shared this already earlier, and I plan to read selected chapters in this particular book. This is a good book because it goes through many subjects and talks about certain things like the Civil War, okay, what took place during the Rothschild family in here. It's also information. This is Ralph Epperson. He is, as far as I know, is no longer living, but he wrote A New World Order, I think he wrote, and he wrote this book here, Unseen Hand, and I think he wrote a couple other books. It'd be good to hear. I plan to read some of his particular things. I might not read the whole book because this is a major book here, but this is written in 1985, and so this is something you might be interested in also. And there are other books I have here on my table here for sure. And we've already gone through some of Dr. John Coleman's works, which I find are very good books to dealing with what I would call the issue. Tavistock Institute, which is probably when we talk about propaganda, which was Edward Bernays, John Rollins Rees is a major key in the early 1900s. It has affected in a lot of areas how not only propaganda, but also with his particular approach, which was he studied what I would call MI6 techniques. And they have actually, the Tavistock Institute really actually has enormous power and control over this country of America. Very few people don't realize that. And whatever the British want us to do and get us involved in, we have gotten involved. And this is key, because when you realize that the Tavistock Institute, that is Britain, is no longer what we call a military power, and probably not even we're in what I would call an economic power as it once was, over 100 years ago. The situation changed drastically after the end of the World War II. And what's interesting about the whole issue is that we do all the dirty work now for whatever Britain wants us to do. And it's a sad story, and it needs to be shared. And James, this guy, James Rollins Rees, was the director there for a long, long time, and it continues on. And MI6 is considered probably the most advanced intelligence agency in the world, as far as I know. They have actually trained U.S. people. They've trained other people also throughout the world. and they've been what I would call, they've been ahead of the peg, so to speak, and then in the spy business. And there's some other entertaining books, but yes, I like those books by John Coleman. The key is simply, I know he's still alive, but he has to be pretty much he's got to be in his 80s or 90s now, and he's probably been threatened by many people. So he probably lives in what I would call in somewhere in secret. But it's sad that a lot of his books are not able to get here. But there's 3 or 4 of them. Maybe I'll get a chance to read. I got one more I need to get, and I haven't gotten it. So his books are pretty expensive because they're not published that often anymore, or even reprinted, which is kind of sad. Eustace Mullins has gotten a group of people, I found out recently, that are in Scotland that are publishing his books, even though Eustace Mullins is dead now. Apparently, someone has given them the rights to republish his books, and the group is actually doing that. And they have done also Dr. John Coleman's books. Unfortunately, the books that I'd like to get, which I'm English actually from America, is that they're not yet in English. They've got them in they got them in Spanish, they've got them in German, and they've got a couple other particular languages, I think. But what bothers me simply is that throughout the world, English and Chinese are the two strongest languages, not majority, but the two most spoken in the world. And England has had the fact, and also here in America has had the fact, since we are English speakers. So it's been all because of what I call economic resources taking place that has made this whole deal going on. But that's transcending now. It's going out, so to speak, because the Chinese are now what we call a military and an economic source of power that the United States is gradually fading out of the picture here. And there's no one coming on the scene here from Europe or anywhere else. It's going to be a problem. So it kind of strikes me, why is it not these books not being printed in English? They're in French, German, and Spanish is what I understand. But I know that simply these people are out of Scotland, so they may look to that way direction towards the European market. But there's over 300 million people lives in the United States. It would be to their advantage to print these books in English, and they are paperback, which is I don't have a problem with that. I'm not going to pay for a book that's going to be hardback, especially the way the print prices are now compared to what they used to be. So anyway, I again would like to wish everyone a good evening here in the United States. I do have people who listen to me, I know, that are in England, and some people may be hearing me also in Australia. So anyway, have a good night. You take care, and we'll be broadcasting next day or two. Okay. All right. Take care.